Jason stood still in the middle of a giant crystal hall, his boots clicking softly against the smooth, glowing floor. He felt out of place, like a shadow in a world made of stars. Tall pillars reached the ceiling, shining with soft blue lights. And alien guards lined the walls, watching him with cold, unreadable eyes. He could feel their stares, sharp like blades, yet he did not move. Jason was the only human here. The only one ever allowed inside the palace of the Zarathian Empire. And even now, he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. It had started with a crash of broken energy core from a Zarathian warship that landed near Earth's orbit. Jason, once just a quiet engineer in the outer colonies, had been the one who stepped forward to fix it. He didn't ask for a reward, didn't expect anything but survival, but somehow, his simple actions saved their capital from a power collapse. So now, here he was invited, or rather summoned, to stand before their queen, not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as a guest of honor. Yet the palace didn't feel welcoming. Its beauty was cold, and the silence inside was thick with tension. Alien faces stared at him from golden walls past rulers, warriors, queens, all with glowing eyes and sharp crowns. Jason swallowed hard, trying not to show fear. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. But his face stayed calm. He had faced broken engines, plasma leaks, and near death in space. This wasn't much different. At least, that's what he told himself. Suddenly, the room went even quieter. A soft chime rang through the air, and every guard bowed low. Jason turned slowly to see a figure entering from the far end of the hall. She was taller than any being he had ever seen, wrapped in flowing silver robes that moved like liquid light. Her skin shimmered with pale gold, and her eyes glowed like twin moons. She walked with a grace that made time seem slower, and every step she took was silent. This was her, the alien queen of the Zarathian Empire. Jason bowed, unsure if he was doing it right. He heard her voice then, not from her mouth, but inside his mind. "Rise, human. You are not a servant here." Her tone was strong, yet gentle, and it made the hairs on his neck stand up. He stood and looked at her, really looked. She was beautiful in a way he could not explain, not just her face, but the way she held herself, like someone who had carried a galaxy's weight for too long. "You saved my world," she said, this time with her actual voice, soft and musical. Jason shook his head slowly. "I only fixed what was broken." The queen tilted her head, studying him as if he were something strange and new. "And that," she replied, "is what no one else could do." Then came the moment that froze every breath in the room. She stepped forward, closer than any royal should ever go to a stranger. A glowing orb floated to her hand, clear, humming with quiet power. "This," she said, "is the orb of Orith. With it, you may ask for anything. One wish, no limits. As a gift from me, and from my people." Whispers ran through the crowd of nobles and guards, their eyes wide with shock. This orb was legendary, never before given to an outsider, not even to their own warriors. Jason looked at it, unsure, nervous, curious. He could ask for wealth beyond imagination, a ship faster than light, land, titles, or even power over systems. He could return to Earth and never work again. But something deep inside him whispered a different idea. He stared into the queen's eyes again, and saw something: loneliness, perhaps, or a silent sadness behind her royal mask. The same loneliness he had felt drifting alone in space for years. The same sadness that never left. Even when he smiled, he didn't reach for the orb, not yet. Instead, he asked a quiet question. "Anything?" The queen nodded slowly with a calm face. "Anything. One wish, speak it, and it shall be yours." Jason looked down, thinking, then back at her again. The hall waited. Everyone held their breath. The silence was thick enough to crush stars. Jason opened his mouth, and the first word he spoke sent a ripple through the room. "I want." He began and paused. The queen's glowing eyes narrowed in interest. Jason continued. "You." Gasps filled the air, a sound like wind through broken glass. The queen did not move. Her eyes wide now, shocked. Jason stood still, calm and serious. "I want you. Not as a queen, as a person," he said softly. And that was when the palace truly fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved, not even the queen. Her glowing eyes stared at Jason like she had misheard him. But she had not. His voice was clear, steady, and honest. He had spoken a wish no one in the galaxy could have imagined. Not a weapon, not a throne, not immortality. He had chosen her. The ministers whispered in panic, their voices sharp and nervous. "How dare he?" someone hissed. "Is he mad?" Another muttered. Guards stepped forward, unsure if they should arrest him or protect him. One even raised his plasma blade. But the queen lifted her hand slowly. Everything froze. Again, her command was silent but powerful. "No harm shall come to him," she said. Her voice calm but strange, almost breathless. She turned to Jason, walking slowly down the steps of her throne. Her silver robes flowed behind her like a river of moonlight. Each step she took echoed like thunder in the silent hall. When she finally stood before him, her head tilted slightly. "You choose me," she said, her voice soft, like she was still trying to understand. "Why?" Jason took a breath, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't kneel, didn't look away. "I've lived among machines most of my life," he said. "Fixed reactors, flown broken ships, ate cold meals in empty cabins." He smiled faintly. "And I've never met someone like you," the queen blinked. And the lights in the hall seemed to dim slightly. "I didn't fix your core for a reward or a title," Jason continued. "I did it because I saw something worth saving." "Me?" she asked quietly. "No," Jason replied. "You were already worth saving, long before I showed up." A pause. A deep silence followed his words. "I chose you because no one else sees you as a person anymore. Just a ruler, a weapon, a goddess," he added. "But I saw your eyes, and in them, I saw someone tired of pretending to be untouchable." The queen's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time in decades, she didn't know what to say. She was the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy. She had ended wars, destroyed rebel fleets, ruled 1,000 worlds, and now a human had chosen her, not out of fear or ambition, but out of something far deeper, something terrifying and beautiful. "You still have time," one of the nobles called out, voice trembling. "Change your wish before it is sealed. Choose something else." Jason didn't look away from the queen. "I don't want anything else," he said simply, and in that moment, he wasn't just a human. He was a mirror, showing the queen her own hidden reflection. She turned her head slowly, looking at the Kosa crowd behind her. Their eyes were wide, their faces full of shock and judgment. Then she looked back at Jason. "You know what this means?" she asked, her voice heavier now. "I will be questioned, challenged. They will say I've lost control." Jason gave a slow nod. "Yes, I know. And you?" she asked again. "You will be hunted, hated. They will call you a thief of royalty." Jason gave a small smile. "Let them." Something in the queen's chest cracked quietly, like ice breaking in spring. She had lived for centuries, seen empires rise and fall, but never once had someone looked at her like this. Like she was not a ruler, but a woman who could be wanted, not just needed. And not for her crown but for her soul. She raised her hand, and the orb of Orith glowed once more. A warm light wrapped around Jason like a soft blanket. The guards stepped back confused, unsure what was happening. The ministers looked at each other in disbelief. "His wish," the queen said, her voice shaking slightly, "is granted." The orb vanished into stardust, floating up and disappearing into the high ceiling of the palace. Gasps filled the room, and the queen turned away, walking back to her throne. But then she paused and spoke again without turning around. "You are now under my protection, Jason of Earth." The words were soft but firm like steel. "No one shall touch you without facing me." Jason didn't move, not out of fear but awe. The queen sat back on her throne, her face unreadable. But her eyes were full of storm. She had not expected this. No one had, not even herself. And for the first time in 1,000 years, she felt uncertain and deeply alive. At first, there was only silence, a deep, heavy silence, like the whole galaxy had stopped breathing. The orb of Orith had vanished, the wish was granted, and Jason stood there, still and calm. But around him, the storm was ready to explode, then. Like thunder crashing through glass, voices rose. Dozens of alien nobles leapt from their seats, shouting in fury. He tricked her. One screamed, his cloak whipping behind him, "This is madness." Shouted another, eyes glowing with rage. "The queen cannot be claimed by a common creature, especially not a human." Guards moved quickly, forming walls between Jason and the rising wave of angry officials. Some of them looked confused, others afraid. But most were simply furious that a simple human had touched what they considered untouchable. Their words spilled like venom across the hall. Unworthy. Disrespectful. Blasphemy. Jason did not flinch. He stood quietly as if he were back in the middle of a broken engine, just trying to find the right wire to fix. But he was not a technician now. He was something more dangerous, someone who had broken tradition, and tradition in the Zerithian Empire was everything. The queen remained seated, but her fingers slowly curled around the armrests of her throne. Her glowing eyes flickered, not with fear, but with fire. She had ruled over planets, commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, but never had her court dared to speak to her like this. Never had they questioned her decision so openly, and yet, it was her own heart now on trial. Jason finally spoke, his voice quiet but strong. "You all speak of power like it belongs only to titles," he said. "But what about choice? What about truth?" The crowd hissed, as if the word truth was an insult. "You think love is a trick," Jason continued, "because you've never seen it without a price." A heavy voice thundered across the room, an elder noble in a robe of midnight black. He was the queen's war advisor, and one of the oldest living beings in the palace. "Silence, human," he bellowed, stepping forward. "You were given a gift beyond measure, and you used it to shame the crown." Jason met his eyes without blinking. "I used it to ask for something real." The old noble pointed a long clawed finger at the queen. "And you, my queen, why do you allow this insult to stand?" The entire hall waited, all eyes on her. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she rose from her throne. Her presence filled the room like a rising sun. When she spoke, her voice was calm but layered with warning. "I gave him a choice. And I will not punish honesty," she said. "But more than that," she continued, her voice sharper now, "I will not let my heart be ruled by your fear." The elder noble sneered. "Your heart is a weakness." The queen's eyes glowed brighter, and a cold wind swept across the hall. "No," she replied. "My heart is why this empire still breathes." She walked down the steps, each one echoing like a battle drum. When she reached Jason's side, she turned and faced the crowd. "He asked for me, not my power, not my empire, not my throne. Me," she said, her voice growing louder, "and I granted it. Let that be written into the record of stars. The queen was chosen, and she chose in return." The court fell silent. Again, but this time, not from shock, from fear, and perhaps a flicker of respect. The old noble stepped back, his face pale and quiet now. The guards lowered their weapons, slowly, uncertainly, and the whispers turned to silence. The queen turned to Jason, and in a gesture that none had ever seen before, she reached out and gently took his hand in hers. It was not just a symbol, it was a declaration, a silent shout that said, "He is mine. I am his, let the stars witness it." Jason squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth of her skin, not cold royalty, but a living, breathing person. He didn't speak, because he didn't need to, in that moment, surrounded by power, anger, and silence. Two hearts beat together louder than the chaos around them. And as the queen and the human stood hand in hand, the palace shook not from anger, not from war, but from the beginning of change. A change that no one could stop now. The palace felt different that night. The sharp whispers had faded into heavy silence, and the glowing halls no longer looked like thrones of power. Instead, they felt cold and empty. Jason followed two silent guards down a quiet corridor made of black glass and floating lights. He didn't know where they were taking him, only that the Queen had summoned him again. Not to the throne room, not to the court, but to her private chamber, a place no outsider had ever entered before. The guards stopped at a tall silver door, then turned and walked away without a word. Jason stood there alone, his reflection staring back at him from the metal surface. He took a slow breath and placed his hand on the scanner beside the door. It hummed softly, then slid open without a sound. He stepped inside, and for a moment, forgot how to breathe. There were no guards, no weapons, no throne. Only soft glowing lights, strange floating plants, and walls covered with paintings, not of war or conquest, but of stars, of oceans, of a smiling child with glowing eyes, and at the center of it all stood the Queen, her back turned, her long silver robe hanging loosely, her crown nowhere in sight. She wasn't queen here, she was just her. "You came," she said softly. Without turning, Jason nodded. "You asked. I didn't think you would." "After what happened in the hall," she whispered. "I meant what I said," Jason replied. "I don't want your power, I want you." She finally turned, and for the first time, Jason saw her without the layers of royalty, no armor, no gold, no mask, just her tired, elegant, and vulnerable. She looked at him with quiet eyes, eyes that held galaxies of pain. "I have a secret," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "One no one else knows, not my court, not my advisors, not even the stars." Jason didn't move, didn't interrupt. He could feel that this wasn't just a conversation, it was a moment she had been holding inside for a very long time. "I was never meant to be queen," she said, walking to a low seat made of crystal. "I was the second daughter. Forgotten, unimportant." She looked at her own hands, her voice shaking slightly. "My sister was the heir. She was strong, wise, loved by all. She would have been a better ruler." Jason slowly sat across from her, listening. "What happened?" he asked gently. The Queen closed her eyes for a moment. "There was an attack, a secret war. She died protecting the palace. I was the only one left." She took a shaky breath. "They put the crown on my head before the fires even stopped burning." Jason's chest tightened. She had carried the weight of an empire built on tragedy, and no one ever asked if she wanted it. "I didn't choose this," she said, looking at him now, tears glowing faintly in her golden eyes. "But every day I wake up and pretend. For them, for the court, for the galaxy." She laughed bitterly. "And now here you are, the first person to ask me what I want." Jason leaned forward, voice quiet. "Then let me ask again. What do you want?" The Queen looked down her, voice breaking like a soft crack in glass. "I want to stop pretending," she whispered. "I want to be seen, not as a weapon, not as a ruler, but as a woman who has been alone for too long." Jason gently reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was cold at first, then slowly warmed in his touch. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said, not as a promise, not as a romantic line, but as a truth spoken from one lonely soul to another. For a long time they sat in silence, hand in hand. The stars outside her window blinked gently, like they were listening. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in her long life, the Queen of 1,000 worlds finally allowed herself to rest. No guards saw them, no court reported it, but in that quiet moment, a bond was born, not from power or law, but from understanding, and it was stronger than any crown ever forged. The next morning, the stars above the palace burned strangely quiet, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Jason stood in the center of the ancient circle of judgment, a wide stone ring that floated above a glowing lake. Below him, The deep water shifted with light and memory above him. The queen stood on the balcony with her council behind her, all watching in silence. Today was not about love or crowns. Today was a trial by ancient Zarathian law. No outsider could claim the queen, not even with her blessing. But there was one forgotten rule, buried in the old codes of starlight. If a foreigner could complete the trial of the heart, he would not only be accepted, but honored. No one had attempted it in over 1,000 years, because no one ever dared to love the queen before. Jason didn't flinch when the stone beneath him began to tremble. He didn't run when a voice rose from the water. Deep and old, your heart speaks boldly, it said, echoing through the sky. Now show us if it can endure truth, fear, and pain. The first trial was the trial of truth. Jason was pulled into a vision, not a dream, but something real. He stood in the middle of Earth again. In the ruins of his childhood, he saw the day his family died in a colony fire, the faces he had buried, the screams he had forgotten, the tears he never allowed himself to cry. He dropped to his knees, shaking. "Why show me this?" he whispered, and the voice replied, "Because a heart must face its own darkness before holding another's light." Jason did not run. He stood, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I carry them with me." The vision faded, and the stone beneath him glowed blue. The first trial was past. The second trial was fear. The lake rose into towers of water, taking shapes of warships, monsters, and all the horrors of the galaxy. He saw the queen falling, bleeding, calling his name in silence. He saw himself failing her, too weak to protect, too slow to reach. It wasn't his death he feared, it was hers. But Jason clenched his fists and stepped forward. "I fear losing her," he shouted, "but I won't let fear decide for me." The illusions shattered like glass, and the waters calmed. The second trial was past. The third and final test was pain. Jason was wrapped in beams of light, silent, invisible, but burning his mind and soul. He felt every scar the queen had hidden, every lonely night she endured. Her sorrow became his. Her burden pressed on his shoulders, heavy as moons. Most men would have screamed, begged, collapsed, but Jason did not fall. He whispered through the pain, "You were never meant to carry this alone. I'm here now." The light broke, and the trial ring began to shine bright gold. Above, the crowd gasped. Nobles, soldiers, even the queen's most loyal guard. They had watched this human walk through the fire and come out stronger. The lake below shimmered, turning into still starlight, and the voice spoke one final time. "He has passed. Not because he is strongest, but because he was willing to break for love." The queen walked slowly down from her balcony, alone. The crowd parted without a word. Her eyes were glassy with tears, her steps soft, as if each one carried 1,000 emotions. When she reached Jason, she didn't speak. She simply placed her forehead against his, a gesture of deepest honor among her people, and in that quiet moment under the open stars, before the judgment of her empire, she whispered the words she had never dared speak before. "I choose you too." Cheers did not follow, not yet, but a deep, trembling silence of respect did. Even the oldest voices in the court could not deny what they had seen. Jason had not fought with weapons, he had won with heart. And as the queen took his hand, the empire saw something they never expected. Not weakness, not rebellion, but the birth of a new kind of strength. One born not from fear, but from love chosen freely. The galaxy watched in silence, from noble houses on floating cities, to miners in deep space outposts, to soldiers on cold moons. Everyone had heard of the human who passed the trial of the heart, but there was one thing still left undone, one final moment that would decide everything. Because the trial may have accepted Jason, but the queen still had to make her choice, and her choice would change the empire forever. Inside the palace, the grand hall stood empty, except for her. She sat alone on her throne, without her crown, her robes folded beside her like broken wings. She stared at the glowing floor beneath her feet, her heart heavy and uncertain. For a queen who had survived wars, betrayals, and the weight of the stars, this choice felt the hardest of all. Because this time it wasn't about politics, power, or duty. This time it was about herself. Her council had begged her to reconsider. "Do not choose the human," they said. "He will be your weakness. He is not one of us. He does not understand what it means to carry a crown." But none of them understood what she had seen in Jason's eyes. Not ambition, not fear, but truth and hope. He had stepped into her past, walked through her pain, and carried her sorrow as if it were his own. And yet he never tried to fix her. He simply stood beside her, steady and real. And in that stillness, she had seen herself, not the queen, not the weapon, just a woman longing to be seen. And he had seen her completely. The doors to the hall opened slowly. Jason entered, walking alone. Dressed simply, no armor, no guards, no pride. He bowed not to the throne, but to her. And that single gesture broke something in her chest again. Because it reminded her that with him, she was never a ruler first. She was a person. She rose from her throne, walked down the steps slowly, her hands trembling. And when she reached him, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "They want me to say no." Jason nodded quiet. "I understand. They say you'll break me," she said, "make me weak." "That love has no place in power." Jason looked into her eyes, his voice soft but sure. "Then maybe it's time power makes space for love." Her breath caught, her heart pounding louder than any battlefield. And then, with the weight of 10,000 years behind her, the queen turned to face the glowing stone table where royal decisions were sealed. She placed her palm on it, and her voice rang through the hall like thunder in still air. "Let this be known across the stars," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I choose him." Gasps echoed through the chambers, but no one dared interrupt. "I choose the one who did not ask for my crown, but offered me his heart. I choose the one who passed not only the trials of fire, but of silence, of sorrow, and of truth." She turned back to Jason, her golden eyes bright with tears. "From this moment forward, you are not my subject, not my outsider, but my equal." Jason stepped forward, gently taking her hands in his. No music played, no bells rang, but the silence itself felt holy. Because in that moment, a queen did something no queen before her had done. She loved, openly, and without fear. The golden lights of the hall rose higher, and the royal sigil changed slightly, but forever. A single human star was now part of the empire's mark, and the nobles who once whispered in fear could only watch in silence, for they knew the world had shifted. Power didn't bow that day, it transformed. And the queen, long feared and worshipped, finally felt something stronger than power: peace. The stars above the palace no longer looked cold. They shimmered like soft candles in the night quiet, peaceful and full of promise. And below them, in the heart of a once unshakable empire, something rare had happened. Not a war, not a rebellion, not the fall of a ruler, but the beginning of love, honest and chosen, between a queen and a human who had never belonged. Until now Jason stood beside her, not behind, not beneath, beside. No throne separated them now. He no longer wore his old clothes, the ones stained by years of repair work and survival. Now he wore a new robe, dark blue with silver stitching, handwoven by the queen's own attendants. But even then, he still walked like a man of earth, simple, grounded, never pretending to be more than he was. The queen changed too, not in her power but in her presence. She smiled more now, gently, like the sun rising after a storm. She walked through the halls no longer as a statue of fear, but as a living symbol of strength and humanity. Her people began to see it. The guards who once feared losing her respect now followed her with greater love. The nobles who once whispered behind her back now stood silent, unsure, slowly learning. They traveled together to war-torn planets, forgotten colonies, drifting ships filled with hunger, and wherever they went, people stared, not because she was the queen, and not because he was the human who passed the trials, but because they were together, hand in hand. Two worlds joined not by force, but by choice. Jason did not ask for titles. He did not become king, emperor, or commander. He became her anchor, her balance, her second breath. And in return, she became his sky, his warmth, his impossible dream made real. At night, in her quiet chamber garden, they would sit beneath the starlight, and sometimes she would place her head on his shoulder and whisper, "Do you ever miss Earth?" He would smile and say, "Not when I'm with you." Then she'd close her eyes and say something softer than a sigh, "You were my wish too." Word spread across the galaxy, not through fear, but through story. Children told tales of the human who dared love a queen. Soldiers remembered the moment power chose peace. And even the stars seemed to burn a little brighter. The queen had ruled 1,000 years. But in all that time, she had never been alive until him. And Jason had traveled countless light years, but he had never found home until her. In the great halls of the future, where the story would be told again and again, it would not begin with war or with a crown. It would begin with a broken engine, a quiet human, and a queen who gave him a wish she couldn't refuse. And when he chose her, the stars themselves leaned closer to watch a new kind of empire rise, not built with ships and fire, but with love, trust, and hearts brave enough to choose each other.